I took my infant daughter for a walk through our new neighborhood a few days ago. My family and I just moved to this city, and we've been on a few strolls since then. Nothing too extensive, just out getting a feel for our surroundings. I'm unfamiliar with the buildings and people who live around us, and after my experience here, I feel like moving a million miles away. It's funny how these things work sometimes. I can't help but feel like I've somehow exposed myself to a terrible force, almost as if I've allowed something unnatural to enter my world. Our walk began as normal. My boyfriend was out running errands, so it was just me and the babes. I strapped my 1-year-old daughter into her stroller and slipped on her pink hat after applying some sunscreen. To my dismay, the weather had rapidly changed from warm and sunny to cool and cloudy after only walking 10 minutes. We get used to these sort of occurrences in Nova Scotia. I must have been distracted with the threat of rain because I ended up in a subdivision I was unfamiliar with. I couldn't be sure, but it seemed like we were only a few streets over from where I lived, so I carried on down towards the direction that seemed right. It was not. But instead of turning around, I was intrigued with what lay at the end of the short road. A massive red house. I had never seen this building before, even though it was extremely large and sat on a vast field that stretched out in every direction. This house must have been 7-8 stories tall and looked residential. I couldn't see any signs indicating it was a business, and there was only one rusted pickup truck parked at the side entrance. Not to mention the building seemed to be in a serious state of disrepair. My daughter seemed content enough with our adventure, and the weather hadn't degraded, so I decided to take a closer look. There were birds everywhere. Crows, lining every branch of a dead tree that stood near the end of the dirt driveway. There were so many of them. I should have taken that as a sign, but I didn't. I wish I had. And then he appeared from the back of the house. He walked slowly and strangely. He nodded his head in short, quick bursts. I stood frozen with my knuckles white around the handles of the stroller. The crows were so loud. Their cawing and hacking was almost deafening. That's the best way to describe it. It was like they were screeching directly at me. And this man, the twitching, nodding, hunched-up man that limped in from out of nowhere. His hair was scraggly, with several bald spots. His limbs were long and thin, and his right foot dragged behind him. His clothes were old and tattered, caked in dirt, and made crunching sounds as he staggered about. He wheezed. The crows screamed, and I looked up at them again on the tree. I could see that they were furiously eating each other. I went to scream, but nothing came out, although I could hear my daughter shriek and cry like never before. The man was now standing lopsided, roughly 10 feet away from us. I couldn't see his face. Maybe I turned away too fast, or maybe I had tears in my eyes. This is what I told myself at first, but deep down, I knew the truth. He had no face. It was only a blur of shadows and distorted features, and oh my God, I can't stop crying and shaking as I write this, but I have to keep going for my child's sake. He was a monster, and he walked towards me and my baby with a morphing face and raspy breath. I have never ran so fast in my life. I still couldn't scream. It was like my vocal cords were frozen and my throat was closed. Everything went blurry, but I just kept going. I had to get my daughter out of that hellish nightmare I dragged her into. This is not where the story ends. Oh God, I wish it were. But it's not. I explained what happened to my boyfriend when he got home later that evening. He was understandably upset. Our daughter was now peacefully sleeping and didn't seem to be bothered by the day's events once I got her home. I, however, was a complete wreck. My boyfriend wanted to take me to see a doctor and get something to calm me down. I almost agreed, but I couldn't stand the thought of leaving the house. It didn't feel safe out there. I slept for only 2 hours that night and had the most disturbing nightmares. My partner left for work at around 6 a.m. and the baby was still sound asleep. I kissed my man goodbye at the door and leaned against the doorway in exhaustion as I watched our beat-up car go down the road and out of sight. I felt dreadfully exposed. And then something caught my eye. A small object in a bush near my front door had caught the glint of the rising sun, so I bent down to pick it up. It was a toy truck. There's many families living around us, so I didn't find it odd. I was sure some child had just dropped it while cutting through our yard on their way home. But as I examined it, it seemed far too old to belong to any child around here. It was one of those heavy cast iron toys that you never see anymore. It must have been 50 years old and looked like an antique more than a child's plaything. Nobody would let their kid play with this now. It was dangerous and sharp and had small pieces. I remember being annoyed that I was now responsible for disposing of this piece of crap. Then I thought about posting it on eBay and seeing if it really was worth anything. I left it on my kitchen table and got ready for the day. When 9 a.m. rolled around, I started to get a bit worried. Sometimes my little girl likes to sleep in, like her mama, but never this late. I went up and checked on her, and there she was, sleeping soundly, her little tummy rising and falling and her cute lips puckered up in her usual adorable manner. I felt relieved and headed back downstairs. I figured she must have been extra tired today. Then 10 a.m. came, and passed. 11 a.m. Still, she hadn't woken up. I was about ready to call my mother, my boyfriend, and probably 911 when I finally heard her soft cries echo down the hall. I remember feeling silly for being so worried. I almost danced into her room and pushed open her door, but what I found sucked the air out of my lungs. My baby, my little girl, was covered in blood. She seemed perfectly fine and unharmed, actually quite content as she played with one of her toys, but the blood was everywhere. I could barely make out where her hands were. There was so much blood. I hurried towards her and picked her up. I undressed her and took a warm washcloth over every inch of her body, but there was no wound. I started crying at this point, just softly sobbing so as not to upset my child. What was wrong with my baby girl? I was about to call a cab to head down to the hospital, but then I saw it. The old cast iron truck was in my baby's crib. She was playing with it, and there was blood oozing out of it. That's when I lost it. I ran outside, screaming and clutching my naked daughter tightly to my chest, dried blood covering my clothes, face, hair, and hands. People came out of their houses, and cars slowed down on the street as they saw me. I could only imagine what they were thinking. Someone must have called the police because they showed up shortly afterwards, but my boyfriend was the only one who could get me to calm down and start making sense. They checked out my house, and their forensics team took the bloody toy truck away. I told them about the man in the red house, and they said that they would go investigate and that they would keep me and my family informed on what they found. And that was it. I saw the man that night. He stumbled past my living room window at around 4 a.m. I was sitting in the dark on my laptop. I didn't move a muscle when I heard him. I don't think I could have moved if I'd wanted to. He put something else on the lawn, and I felt hot tears fall on my face. Once the sounds out front stopped, I called the cops, and they came right round. They found very large footprints and a clump of hair tied in string. And that was it. They keep telling us they're patrolling the area and will keep us abreast on what they find, but I feel so hopeless. We're still waiting to find out what the lab results say about the blood found on the toy truck and the hair clump. And by the way, the house is real. The cops checked it out and said that it was long abandoned. I wish it had just been an illusion or something, but it's still there. With all the crows. And knowing it's out there, so close to my home, it makes me never want to sleep again. I feel like it wants my daughter. I came home to a message waiting for me from my local police station. When I called them back, they informed me the results were back from the lab on the blood and the hair samples they gathered, and this is where I need your help. They rushed through the results like they didn't even care. They said the blood came back as goat's blood. The hair came back inconclusive, which I was almost relieved to hear because I don't know how much more of this I can take in. Why would there be goat blood? Is there some significance to goats and weird shit? I've been too exhausted and stressed to search this extensively, so any info would be helpful. And now for the really scary part. A little after 1 a.m. last night, I heard my baby crying quite loudly over the monitor. I was actually kind of happy to hear her since I knew I'd be up for a while and some cute baby company would have done me some good. I started making her bottle, but dropped everything when I heard her wildly thrashing and screaming. I tripped running up the stairs. I was going so fast, I busted my lip open, but I didn't even feel it at the time. I could hear her freaking out as my head laid on the floor in front of her room. I swear I could feel her movements. Then I opened the door, and I promise you, she was sound asleep. It was like I had imagined the whole thing. I thought I was losing my mind until my boyfriend came out of the bedroom in a dazed panic and asked me what was wrong with the baby. He had heard her crying too, but she was out like a light. She barely even flinched when I burst through the door, so she must have been in a deep sleep. Please, help me.